Hello.
Hi.
Welcome. My name is Carly McPherson. I see some familiar faces in the crowd and some not so familiar faces. So I am the director of the Greenberg Families Library, which is located here in the JCC. And I'd like to welcome all of you to tonight's, oh, look at me hitting thing. Well, turn great stars. Oh my God. I know when I started over.
Wow. You're hitting it all ways.
And there it is.
I know
Thank you.
technology. Okay. I'd like to welcome you all to tonight's presentation on the history of Larocque's department store. I'd also like to thank Tegan Goldsmith and the Ottawa Jewish Historical Society for this wonderful collaboration. And it is now my pleasure to invite the OJHS President, John Diener, up to the stage to share a few words about tonight's speaker.
Thank you, Carly, and thank you to all of you for coming in tonight to hear this talk on rocks. I'm going to introduce Robert, who has prepared what I heard is an amazing presentation. Robert Weinberg's career in the Canadian Federal Public Service spanned over 35 years, of which 28 were with the immigration program. He served both abroad as well as in policy positions at national headquarters, and most recently in Winnipeg as Director General of Citizen and Immigration Canada's Prairies and Northern Territories region. Robert retired from the public service in 2008. He's written and published several peer-reviewed articles on immigration history and on military history. Robert wrote the book entitled Responding to Immigrant Settlement Needs, The Canadian Experience, which was published in 2012. He co-edited and contributed 2 chapters to integration and inclusion of newcomers and minorities across Canada, and has contributed chapters to immigration regulation in federal states, challenges and responses in comparative perspective. That was in 2014. Immigrant Experiences in North America in 2015, reassessing the Rogue Tory Canadian Foreign Relations in the Diefenbaker era in 2018, and the Global Atlas of Refugees and Asylum Seekers in 2022. So even though he retired in 2008, he never stopped working. Robert was chair of the Board of Trustees of the Canadian Museum of Immigration at Pier 21 in Halifax from 2017 to 2024. He's also a former chair of the Board of Governors of Immigration Research West, the Board of Directors of the Immigrant Centre Manitoba, and the Board and Trustees of the Manitoba Opera. In August 2024, he was appointed to the Board of Directors of Manitoba Centennial Centre Corporation. In 2020, he was recipient of the Manitoba Honor 150 Medal, honoring people from across that province who gave back to their communities. Mr. Weinberg has a BA in History from the University of Toronto, as well as an MA in Canadian History and a graduate diploma in Public Administration, both from Carleton. And now, Robert.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. I hope everyone can hear okay. Since you've already seen very quickly the presentation, we'll just skip it. Help with that. When I was very young, even before I focused on the fact.
Can you bring the mic closer to you, Robert?
Okay. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. So, when I was young and before I even focused on the fact that my dad owned a department store, I was aware that we always had dinner later than everyone else on our street. That's because Dad only got home at 6:30 because the store was open until 6 o'clock. And this was very important for both me and my brother, because all the kids were out on the street playing and we were going to be late and wouldn't get our positions on the make-up baseball team or football team. But we had to put up with that. Also, among my friends, I was the only one whose dad was not around on Saturdays, because again, he was at work because the store was open. And as you know, Saturdays are probably the busiest day in retail, so he didn't have much of a choice. And one of the difficult things I had when I started school was how to answer the question, what does your dad do? There were countless forms where we had to fill out that sort of thing. And the box wasn't big enough to write, owns a department store. So I asked Dad what I should reply. And in his modest way, he said, write in merchant. So I finally had the one-word description of what my dad did, even though it was hardly a fair description of everything he had to do. Now behind that one word, the store, I've entitled this presentation, and I called it that because to us, that's what we called it, the store. There was no question of which one it was. And this is really a story of two families and a business that will link them together. The pamphlet that this is based on was published by the Historical Society of Ottawa in 2021. And it's available on their website. You can download a PDF if you're interested in that. Now, before I return to my own memories, because that's what I try to focus on, I'll do a quick overview of the history of Larocque. Now, I live in Winnipeg now, and so I thought it would be sort of appropriate to do a land acknowledgement for Winnipeg rather than Ottawa, because you heard those over and over and over again. And the picture is Lower Fort Garry, and this was where the first of the numbered treaties that cover all of Western Canada were signed in 1871. And Winnipeg, the Treaty 1 territory, is the original land of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene people, and also the home of the Red River Métis Nation. So I'm proud to acknowledge that. Now this is one of my favorite pictures. This is just before the store opened. If you look closely, there are soap markings on the picture windows. Because they were so clean, I wanted to make sure that the workers realized there were windows there and didn't bash through them. But the history of Larocque actually started earlier than this building, which opened in 1923. Alphonse Larocque ran a general store at 270 Dalhousie, which I think was the corner of Dalhousie and Murray. And for a long time, he was conscious of business being drawn away by the big Anglophone department stores being built on Rideau Street. And he dreamt of competing with them. And he wanted to provide a bigger place for Franco-Ontarians to be able to shop and be comfortable, and where all the sales clerks would speak French. So he began assembling some land on Rideau Street, and At Rideau and Dalhousie, the City of Ottawa had some property that they were, I think they had obtained the idea of having a streetcar circle built there, but eventually they decided not to do that and put the land up for sale, and Mr. Larocque bought it. In all, he paid about $60,000 for the land acquisitions, including the city's property. And then he could pursue his dream. This is the excavation for the building in 1922. It was built in less than a year, if you can believe it. You don't see that happening anymore. The building was designed by local architectural firm Wilson, Burgess and Hazelgrove, and the general contractor was Alex Gavrock. And as you saw before, and you can see in the current Mercury Court, it's a very handsome building. I think it's probably the best example in the city of commercial Gothic. Not too much was built that way. A lot of collegiate Gothic and Leeds Collegiate and St. Paul's University and other places, but not too much commercially. When it opened, the Ottawa Journal actually described it as one of the most beautiful stores in the city. And it cost about $200,000 to build. That would probably be $20 million or more in today's money. The store opened it was also one of the first concrete buildings. There was a fair amount of steel structure going up, but it was one of the earlier ones with concrete. And it was actually stressed to be 5 stories high, although it was built as 3 stories, and that's what it still is. This is a picture from opening day, and you can see the crowds lined up to go into the store, and the gentleman in the circle is Mr. Larocque. When it opened, the store operated on the ground floor and the basement only, and as I mentioned, all staff were bilingual. The upper floors were rented to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and they had recently, rather the Northwest Mounted Police had recently been merged with the Dominion Police that provided federal policing east of the prairies. And with this change, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police headquarters was moved from Regina to Ottawa, and they needed a place for the headquarters, and that was the top 2 floors of Larocque. You may run into some accounts of the store saying that the building was built for the RCMP, but that is incorrect. It was built as a department store. Now, the building itself was a great success, not so much as business. A little bit like COVID, at the end of the First World War, as the world returned to normal, there were all sorts of supply chain problems. He had trouble getting merchandise. He had found prices higher than he'd expected. And as he had done in his old general store further up Dalhousie, he was very generous in extending credit to his customers, really too generous. And 2 years later, he went bankrupt. The trustees took over the property and the building and sold it to the provincial bank, which is one of the forerunners of the National Bank. And they bought it for $158,000, so roughly $100,000 less than Mr. Larocque had invested for the land purchase and the construction. In time, Mr. Larocque paid back all his creditors what he owed. He was very conscientious towards his reputation. And when he died in 1963 at the age of 87, he was well respected. He left the retail business and had become a provincial inspector of buildings, I believe, and made a good career from that. Now, with the building and the business in trusteeship, that offered an opportunity for someone, and that someone was my grandfather. My grandfather, Joseph Hirsch Weinberg, was in the dry goods business in Montreal, and he was partnered with his father and with cousins by the name of Goodman. But he wanted to have his own business. So he came to Ottawa in September 1926 to run the liquidation sale for Larocque. And it went very well. Business was great. And he realized that if he didn't have to carry Mr. Larocque's big debt load, he could make money on them. And so he purchased Larocque's from the provincial bank. And of course the bank held the mortgage. And because of the price that the provincial bank had paid, he was paying a lot less for the business than Mr. Larocque had originally paid out, and that was the difference between profit and loss. And business was so good that in the later 20s, he looked forward to expanding the store when the lease with the RCMP was over to the upper floors, and he also bought the neighboring property on Rideau Street, again with plans to expand the store. His plans were somewhat put off by the crash in 1929, and so he reduced his ambitions at that time, because he had actually been thinking of building those extra 2 floors that the building had been stressed for. But interestingly enough, Ottawa in the Depression years was probably the least affected of all major cities in Canada because of the federal government. The federal government didn't lay off a lot of workers like was happening in commercial and industrial cities. They did reduce the salaries of public servants by 10%, but with deflation, basically, they were in the same position as they were, and they had purchasing power. So Larocque's and other stores in Ottawa managed pretty well through the Depression. And then, with the coming of the Second World War, Ottawa, sleepy old Ottawa, really grew with people coming to join the war effort from across the country. Not only the Department of Defense, but other government departments grew by leaps and bounds, and they were all consumers. The 40s was a very good time for business in Ottawa, and including Larocque. So this is a passport photograph of my grandfather from the 40s. he basically ran the business until 48, 49, and then my uncle and my dad took over. That's my uncle Nordo on the left and my dad Lloyd on the right. Unfortunately, good things don't last forever. And the 1960s brought decline to a lot of businesses in Ottawa, particularly in the core, because of cars and shopping centers. And more people with cars meant that they wanted to park close to the stores they were shopping at. And, you know, for example, the Simpson Sears at Carlingwood, you could park right there and shop, and you didn't have to go downtown anymore. This took a lot of business away. The other thing that was crucial to Larocque's was the Lower Town redevelopment. Most of you probably are aware that in the 60s, the city government, in its wisdom, decided that the relatively inexpensive housing in Lower Town was basically slum housing and needed to be cleaned out so that Lower Town could look more like a part of a capital city. Thank goodness they didn't destroy the entire Blackwood Market area, but they removed about 2,500 homes with the promise that the redeveloped homes would be built within 2 years and everyone could move out. Well, like so many public projects, it took a lot more than 2 years before the Lower Town was repopulated. And once the people had moved to the suburbs, in most part, they weren't coming back. And 650 of those families had revolving accounts at Larocque's. And their disappearance was the difference between profit and loss. So you know, everything was mitigating against businesses in central Ottawa, and particularly for Larocque. So my dad and my uncle decided that really they needed to close the business while there was still equity in it. And it closed on the 31st of December, 1971. This picture has a lot of the display windows covered by closing sale advertisements rather than the normal fashions that would have been in there before. And you know, in retrospect, it was a very wise decision. They retained the building for a number of years and rented it out. And in fact, they operated the ground floor as something called the general store. And basically, it was like you can see in some department stores, if you can find them anymore. There was thrifty shoes and clothing shops and so on without walls in between. And so it's something like an indoor mall on the ground floor. But it was before its time and it didn't really succeed. The building needed uptake. The floors never were fully rented for office space during that period. And so they put the building up for sale, and it was purchased by John Toth, who was the owner of Dworkin Furs and also quite a major real estate investor in Ottawa. And he decided that he wanted to restored the building to its splendor. And he commissioned Barry Podolsky, who many of you probably know the name. He's one of the foremost restoration architects in Ottawa, born in Winnipeg, by the way. And he came up with a plan to redevelop the building. But he needed a place to start, and the place to start was that picture I showed you of the building in May of 1923, before it was opened. And my dad had that picture in his office for years and years, and he gave it to me. And so when Barry approached him, he said, "My son can help you." And so I lent the picture to Barry, and that was the basis of him designing what is now Mercury Court. Now the building looks a little different, and originally the idea was to keep the name the Larocque Building, but Barry had a wealth of knowledge of historic buildings in Ottawa, and he remembered that the old Sun Life building, which was at Bank and Sparks, had on its dome a flying Mercury. When this building was renovated post-war and turned first into a TD Bank, and I'm not sure what's there now. The building is still there, but it's totally nondescript. But the Historical Society of Ottawa saved that dome and had it in storage all these years. And Barry went to them and said, "I think I've got a place for it." And they loved the idea. So that winged Mercury, close-up view of there, ended up on the northeast corner of the building. And it was sort of a natural conclusion to name the building Mercury Court as a result. Now this is what I think is a quite interesting picture. It shows the expansion of the building over the years with a long, I'm going to try and talk loud here, but it's easier to point here. This part was the original building in 1923. So it's about 35 feet wide, very narrow. This was the property that my grandfather purchased in 1930 to expand it. And then in the mid-50s, that was extended all the way to George Street. When John Toth and Barry Podolsky reimagined the building, they added the next building along Rideau Street as well, and continued the architectural theme of the original building. Here's another view, which from the George Street side, showing the tower and the dome, and I guess that's it. Now I'd like to go back to some of my personal reminiscences. And I have to say, I loved visiting the store when I was a kid, and walking through those doors from Rideau or Dalhousie into a brightly lit building full of all sorts of consumer goods, some of which I knew what they were, others I didn't, and the hustle and bustle everywhere. It was exciting, and even as a kid, gave me a thrill that I was tenuously connected to this through my dad. It made me feel part of something bigger than just myself, even at an early age. And of course, like so many kids, I thought, well, maybe I'll grow up and run the store myself. But I had no idea what that might involve at that time. And of course, it didn't happen. But going back to my dad never being at home on Saturdays, when I got a little older, I wasn't that old, 8 or 9, it meant that I could take the bus downtown on Saturdays. And back then, nobody worried about a little kid being on the bus on his own. And I'd go to meet Dad at the store. And when I went downtown, I always got off the bus at Confederation Square and explored downtown. And my favorite haunt was the Union Station. You know, when it was still a train station, it was, again, a very exciting place. Usually I approach it by the Chateau Laurier and go in through the subway that extended under Rideau Street into the station. And I'm sure all of those I see nodding heads who've experienced that, coming out of that tunnel into that vast waiting room modeled on the baths of Caracalla in Rome. It's really thrilling. It's such a beautiful space. And I love to walk through that waiting room. But the area that I liked most was the departures area, which, again, you might remember, it was a wall of glass with all the huge locomotives pulled right up to it. And just watching the people getting on and off the trains, and the trains pulling in and out, was just a great experience. And as you know, before flying became more popular and more practical and less expensive, the train was the way they traveled, and the Union Station was absolutely the busiest spot in the city. From there, it was probably a 10-minute walk for me down to Larocque. And even from there at the corner of Little Sussex and Rideau, could see the big Larocque sign, which was the height of the building. And it had red, blue, green, white neon lights that cascaded down as the name illuminated letter by letter. I always wondered why Larocque had that huge neon sign compared to other department stores. And of course I asked my dad why. And he said, well, your grandfather realized that Larocque was sort of at the end of the commercial strip, and it needed something to attract people that extra couple of blocks, and that's what the sign was designed to do. Now, whenever I passed that huge sign and walked into Larocque, I could count on a warm welcome. I might not know the names of all the staff, but they all knew me. I was Mr. Lloyd's son, because my dad and my uncle, they were never known as Mr. Weinberg. It was Mr. Lloyd and Mr. Nordo. And it really was, in many ways, a big family. People working there were not just paid servants like so many people are in the retail business now. people belonged, and my dad and my uncle cared about them. Now, my dad's office was on the 3rd floor at the north end, and so I would usually head to the elevators and go up to the 3rd floor. The elevator operators didn't have to ask me where I was going because they knew. And there was a little bit of class in this, though. Operators wore white gloves, and they controlled the elevators, and they knew where everything was. There didn't have to be a store directory that people would have to strain their eyes, and they would just ask the elevator, where do I find whatever? And they knew. And like that, they knew that I was going to the 3rd floor. You know, thinking about that, wouldn't you love to have that level of service in a store now? You certainly don't get it when you're ordering online. Anyway, at that far end, where the executive offices were, there was also the accounting offices. And in those days, a computer was a big, noisy IBM adding machine. And there were dozens of them with people clicking away on them, balancing people's accounts and preparing statements and so on. And just to the right of that was the telephone operator who also doubled as the receptionist for my dad and my uncle. And my Uncle Nordo was 3 years older than my dad, so on the basis of seniority, he was the president and my dad was vice president, but that was just nominal titles, and they shared completely the work of the store. If Nordo was there, of course, I'd poke my nose into his office and say hi before going into my dad's office. And I planned to arrive just before a coffee break. The coffee break was kind of neat. My dad would meet at the Honeydew restaurant across the street on Rideau, some of you might remember, and with several other Rideau Street merchants. Often the Kaplan brothers were there. Toby Apple from the ladies' wear store was there. The Slovers from the store in the market often came, and it was just fascinating listening to them talk, because they rarely talked business. They talked politics, they talked culture, they talked about all sorts of things that were absolutely fascinating. And they were all uniformly kind to me, which I really appreciated. This is sort of an aside, but it's still attached to the store. And through the store, I learned firsthand about the Holocaust. Larocque did not have an in-store alteration department. Dresses and suits requiring alterations were sent to a tailor shop a half a block north on Dalhousie Street. And it was owned by Mendel Good. And Good and Company is still there. But Mr. Good has passed away. I remember him as such a kind and gentle man, and he always had time to chat with me. And I remember he always wore short sleeve shirts, winter, summer, whenever. And it's because of those short shirts, I could see a number tattooed on his arm. I realize now that he wanted people to know that he had survived the Holocaust. And I'm really glad that Larocque gave him their business. He was 14 when the war broke out, and was the only member of his immediate family to survive. He spent 6 years in various concentration camps before being liberated by the Americans at the Ebensee concentration camp, which is just east of Salzburg. And although he knew nothing about tailoring at the time, he was admitted to Canada as part of the so-called Jewish Tailors Program, which was set up to admit 2,000 tailors to meet the shortage of tailors in Canada. And he certainly wasn't the only one who probably had never picked up a needle or a pair of scissors. But once he got here, he apprenticed with a Jewish tailor and learned the trade. And then he came to Ottawa and set up his own business. He retired in 2006 and very fittingly sold his business to another immigrant tailor who had emigrated from hard times in Haiti. And that gentleman kept the name of the store. And so there's a continuation of that very special tradition through the tailor shop. Now when it came time for me to consider university, as I mentioned, when I was young, I was thinking, well, I'll grow up and run the store. I initially thought about following my dad's footsteps, which was getting a commerce degree and then an MBA, and going into the family business. This would be the mid-60s, so 5 or 6 years before the store was closed. And this was not my personal preference. I was interested in history and politics, but those family ties are very strong. So when I spoke to my dad about it, his response was something that surprised me at the time, but in retrospect was very profound. He said, "Don't expect that the store will be here forever." So already, several years before it did close, he was seeing the writing on the wall, literally, and realized that the end of the store's days were coming. And as I mentioned, there were various reasons that put pressure on downtown stores, in particular Larocque's, because of the Franco-Ontarian clientele. In retrospect, this was very liberating, because then I could study what I wanted to and make my own career. And when I went to the University of Toronto, many of my friends were taking courses to prepare themselves to go into their family businesses, again, in which they rarely had any interest, but they were doing so because their parents insisted. So I really felt blessed not to have that pressure put on me. Still, it was very sad to me when the day to close Larocque's came. I was still at U of T in the fall of 1971 when that closing sale was going on. But I came home at Christmas and saw the store's shelves quite bare by then. But it was only after graduation in the spring of 1972 that it really hit me that the store was gone. I'd come home from Toronto and I decided I'd like to rent my own apartment. And one of the things I was looking for was a filing cabinet. And Dad said to me, "Well, there's still a few filing cabinets at the store. Why don't you come down and choose one?" And so I did. Now, entering that almost totally empty store was a real shock. Though I knew what to expect, actually seeing each floor of that building, just a sea of concrete pillars extending into the dusk, was so very sad. And it deepened the sense of loss that I already felt for this business that had been part of my life since I was born. And it really marked a moment of change. But I still chose a filing cabinet. I had it for many years. Now over 50 years later, every time I think of that experience, I feel anew that emptiness that I felt when I walked into the empty store. And also, when we left and my dad locked the doors of a place that would never again be Larocque's. But the story didn't quite end there, as you know. First of all, and I'm immensely proud of this. My dad and my uncle looked after the staff as if they were family. As the sales areas were reduced floor by floor as the merchandise was being sold. But this made sense from a commercial point of view, but it also meant that staff could be let go over a longer period of time. And my dad and my Uncle Nordo used their connections in the retail community. And they literally found jobs for every manager and staff in the store. No one was unemployed by the time the doors closed. And so, as I said, Larocque was really a big family, and family looks after itself. Now, once the store did close, I had to learn how to shop. Because when I was a kid, I just go in there and buy what I want, and or buy what was there, because I was obviously limited to the stock that the store had. When I was in Toronto, I learned this a little bit because of the shopping in Toronto stores, but back in Ottawa, it seemed really strange going to buy a shirt or trousers or something like that in another store. And as you mentioned, this was all very shocking time for me, really. But on the other hand, the closing of Larocque's came as a big relief to my mother. Why? Well, first of all, she knew that Larocque's viability had been a huge worry for my dad for years. And she could see that burden lifting from him once the store was closed. And second, whereas shopping at Larocque's for me was a convenience, for my mother it was a constraint. Ottawa was filled with lovely dress shops, but the wife of the owner of Larocque's couldn't shop anywhere but at Larocque's, and just couldn't be seen in an outfit coming from another store. So in 1972, for the first time since marrying my dad in 1940, she could shop anywhere. And she loved it. And also for my dad, it was it was liberating as well. He'd already done a lot of volunteer work in Ottawa. He'd served as president of the Ottawa Kiwanis Club. He was chairman of the Red Feather campaign in 1957, which evolved into the United Way. He was president of the United Way for many years. And in the early 60s, then Mayor Charlotte Whitten appointed my dad as the vice chair of the board of trustees of the Riverside Hospital. And this was before it was built. So he was involved in all the design decisions and the building of the hospital. And shortly after it opened in 1967, he became the chair of the board. And he really enjoyed that challenge. It was, hospital administration was more like what he had learned to do when he was in university. And being free of the daily grind of managing a department store, he could become more involved in that. And he was later appointed to the boards of both the Ontario and Canadian Hospital Association, and as well as the Canadian Council on Hospital Accreditation, where he was chair for several years. This organization, its name has changed, but basically it certifies that hospitals are operating at an acceptable level to take in patients. So, very important job. So the closing of the store helped my dad to do more to give back to the community that had supported the business for so many years. Now, there are many more memories that I have, but I think I'll stop with one final thought. As I wrote in that pamphlet, the store and the people who work there will always occupy a special place in my memory, in my heart. And I know for many Ottawans, including many of you here, and if any of you had lived in Lower Town, certainly the Rocks symbolized a different way of life, a way of life that unfortunately now has passed into history. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
Was it a primarily Francophone clientele, and was service offered in French right up to the end?
Every staff member was bilingual. And that certainly made it unique among department stores in Ottawa.
They sold the business to John Todd.
Yes.
And now the new owner of the building is in the room. Was it difficult to find a purchaser when your father wanted to sell?
It took a couple of years before Mr. Toth decided that he would buy it. So it was on the market, I think, for a year and a half, 2 years before it was being sold.
But not as a department store.
No, as an empty building. Yes?
So what year did the store expand up to the second and third floor?
Pardon me?
In what year did the store expand to the second and third level?
Mid-30s, about 34 or 35. Now this is an interesting tale of connections. Is when the RCMP moved out to the convent on Riverside Drive to be their new headquarters, it was a time when then Prime Minister Bennett was planning his big imperial conference on trade, where he was going to blast Canada and the Commonwealth into world trade to end the Depression. He didn't do that, but the conference took place. My maternal grandfather, Colonel Harry Cogill, at the time was an army officer, but he was working primarily on the state ceremonial. So he was arranging the the drawing rooms at Rideau Hall. He was arranging state funerals, Dominion Day celebrations, and Mr. Bennett asked him to coordinate organizing the conference. And they put his office on the second floor of the Larocque building. So both my future grandparents were working in the same building for a couple of years, which I found really kind of crazy. But that's how the world works, particularly in what was then a very small town. Yes?
I want to tell you a story. My father had a beauty salon at 172 Rio, right across the street. Okay, and so when I was a kid, and on Saturdays, I was either home or waiting for my parents to close up the beauty salon. I'd go into Larocque's, and I had a wonderful time. I used to try on the hats, and the lingerie department was awesome, you know. And
Because you always put the women's wear near the door.
and so I heard French, I heard English, and I never knew it was Dalhousie Street because everybody said Dalhousie. It was called Dalhousie Street because of the Francophone connection. But the thing that I want to tell you is that, as I say, their lingerie department, and they were known for their corsets and that. And I was fitted for my first bra.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you for passing that
On the wild.
on. Yeah.
You said you took the bus to the store. Where were you living?
Oh, in McKellar Heights. Oh. So I took the 661 Carling bus. Yeah, I should have mentioned that. Yes?
Was Larocque's one of the first or one of the last of the big stores to go, or did they all go in a short time? By the time Larocque's closed, had all the other stores closed?
They closed a little earlier because they realized that, as I said, the writing was on the wall. And others struggled on. Ogilvy's, for example, decided to try and follow Freeman's and open stores in the mall, in suburban malls. They went bankrupt. The Slovers, I don't know whether they officially went bankrupt, but it was very close to bankruptcy. Freeman's being the largest store and also being a little more successful in opening suburban branches continued until the Bay bought them out. The Kaplan store continued as well for a few years. In fact, one of the ways of trying to put off the inevitable was to renovate. And after Larocque's closed, they operated out of Larocque's for about 6 months while they were renovating the Kaplan building. But a few years later, they were gone as well.
I think we should all march down tomorrow because the new owner of the building is right here tonight.
Where?
And I just think it's important to keep the memory going, the history going. It's modern now with a new young owner, and he's sitting right at the back.
Where is this?
Is there something we should be shopping?
What's in there?
And back in a couple of years ago, in 2023, which was a centennial of the store, he also put on a wonderful display of the history of the store in the lobby. I think some of the pictures are still there. Yes. Yeah, so drop into the lobby of Mercury Court and step back in history for a while.
Did either you or Peter actually work in the store?
Pardon me?
Did either you or Peter work in the store?
I didn't because I was a little too young. My brother did. he ran the electronics department for about 2 or 3 years just before the store closed. And, you know, the Harvey Glatt has just passed on, and the Treble Clef was one of the places that brought in pop records. My brother did the same thing. He took a very staid little electronics department and turned it into something quite successful, but that wasn't enough to keep the business going.
When you were a kid and as you visited your dad, I wonder if he let you into the movie theaters there, the Francais and the Rideau theaters that were just up and down the street.
I'm sorry, did he
You
let
go
me?
to the Francais or the Rideau theaters.
Oh.
Did you
I
parents
think
let
it
you?
was several years later that I went to anything at the Rideau theater. Most of those were our films, if I recall. And for my son who doesn't know that, the Rideau Theater used to be right where Dalhousie continues north. Rideau Dalhousie used to be a T-junction there. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the interest in that. And thank you for coming out this evening.
I'd like to thank Robert for joining us tonight. That really was wonderful. Growing up in Toronto, you often wouldn't be able to have a talk like this. This is such a close-knit community and everybody knows everybody else. There's so much history. It's really fascinating for me to learn about this city and its Jewish history, especially in the market where I lived when I first moved here. I had no idea I was living amongst such rich Jewish history, so this really is quite wonderful. Just quickly, I'd like to welcome the aforementioned Bill Siolis. I'm sorry, I hope I am pronouncing the last name correctly. I would like to present a gift to Robert.
Oh, nice.
Nice to see you again, Robert.
Thank you.
Another round of applause for. I did invite him to Ottawa to celebrate our 100th centennial anniversary. We have a beautiful picture in front of the building that I posted on LinkedIn at that time. And from the 100 years, then I have a little medallion that we prepared to celebrate the 100 years. It's the Mercury Court head on it. And in the back it reads, "This medal commemorates the 100th anniversary of Mercury Court, a distinct architectural landmark in Ottawa's Barber Market Heritage Conservation District." And also I have a booklet that our company prepared that we also wrote that not only the history that you presented here this evening, but also what we did to the building since 2015 when we purchased it. We spent close to $4 million in renovations. Right now we have a lot of high-tech firms, Embassy of Sweden, national retailers in the building, and it's thriving. So it's doing very well. We maintain the heritage, and we still work closely, even though he's retired, with Barry Polsky. That guides us all the way. So with Barry's guidance, we're maintaining the heritage of look of the building and feel. And those of you who are curious, the building wasn't for sale when we purchased it. A broker was showing us the Dunn's building across the street. And I looked at Mercury Court and I said, "I don't want this one, I want that one." And he said, "It's up for sale." I said, "Yes, it is."
Oh.
That's what we got.
I promise I'll release you all to kibitz and eat in a moment. I would also like to present Robert with this gift from the OJHS and the Greenberg Families Library there. Got all the...
You're gonna have to check
Lots
out
of
the bag.
Lots of different names of different Jewish businesses on there, especially Larocque, and a wonderful community book called Common Thread. Yes. And if you would all indulge me for just a moment, you'll see when you sat down you had booklets on your seats. And I'm really excited to share with you that the Greenberg Families Library is going to be hosting a Jewish Book Festival this October on the 23rd, 24th, and 26th. The festival will be featuring a lineup of wonderful national, local, and international authors, including Barbara Fratkin, Elan Stabbins, Anna Solomon, and the one I am personally most excited for, David Bezmoskas. You'll find all the details for the festival inside those pamphlets and on the JCC's website, and I do hope to see many of you there. And with that, I'd like to thank Robert again for joining us and presenting such a wonderful story to us, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening.